Hello history lovers and welcome back to the channel. With the release of the new Napoleon film on Apple TV, I thought we would take a look at Vanessa Kirby's character, the mesmerising and enchanting Empress Josephine, the first wife of Napoleon Bonaparte and the mother of Hortense, Queen of Holland. Oh, quick disclaimer, as with all of my French videos, there will be awful pronunciation. I will anglicise where possible, but if you have an issue, blame my school French teachers. Empress Josephine was born Marie-Joseph Rose Taché de la Pagerie, also known as just Rose, on the island of Martinique on the 23rd of June 1763. Her parents, Rose and Joseph, were part of the lower nobility and were plantation owners. In 1766, a 3-year-old Rose had to flee the plantation she had grown up on as it was hit by a hurricane. Rose would not look back on her home with fondness. As will become very apparent with the future Mrs. Bonaparte, she loved fashion and clothes, and she even loved the Caribbean culture. But being on a plantation, in the heart of slavery, she would have seen unspeakable things, and she would never talk about it again. In 1773, Rose was sent to a convent in Fort-de-France, and it was here that she received an education that would make her a suitable match for someone of a higher social rank than her. This came to fruition in October in 1779 when 16-year-old Rose left Martinique to go to France to wed a viscount no less, Alexandre François-Marie Viscount Beauharnais. The marriage had been arranged by Rose's aunt. Alexandre was
genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Not far wrong. He was intelligent, he loved women, except his wife, and he was overall a playboy who cheated on Rose right from the start. Unfortunately, this was considered normal for most of history. Alexandre and Rose officially wed on the 13th of December 1779 at the Noisy-le-Grand, just outside Paris. Despite his infidelity, the couple produced 2 children, Eugene and Hortense. Their first child, Eugene, was born on the 3rd of September 1781, and their second child, Hortense, was born on the 10th of April 1783. When Hortense was born, Rose was all alone. Alexandre was away in the French colonies, where he met one of his former lovers. This woman wanted Alexandre back and started to badmouth his wife Rose, and even convinces him that their daughter Hortense was not his. Although I doubt that took much convincing, because if you haven't guessed already, this is far from a happy marriage. While Alexandre was away, Rose moved into her in-laws' palace in Paris, like you do. But when he returns, he throws his wife out, as he is convinced that she is being unfaithful to him. Now, what I'm about to tell you has made me a bit of a fan of Josephine, or Rose, whatever you want to call her. She was not willing to lie down and take it. Rose gets herself a lawyer and manages to use the justice system to prove that she has been slandered, and she wins the case. So, her good-for-nothing husband has to pay her alimony money, and although they separate, not divorce, separate, she is allowed to keep her title of Viscountess and continues to live in the palace in Paris that he kicked her out of. However, the scandal and rumours mean that she is exiled from court, and although she can use her title, she can't be received at Versailles as the Viscount's wife, and so sadly, she is ostracised by the aristocracy. By the 5th of March 1785, they had officially separated, and Rose was given the custody of Hortense, while Alexandre had custody of their son Eugene. Now, I don't know if Alexandre refused to pay the alimony, or if Rose overspent compared to what she was given, or what happened, but for some reason, Rose started to struggle financially, and she had to sell some of her jewellery to pay for living expenses. And it got so bad that in 1788 she took Hortense with her back to her family in Martinique, where they stayed for 2 years. Meanwhile, in France, the revolution has started. Her estranged husband, Alexandre, votes for the abolition of the privileges of the nobility, which makes him popular, and Rose benefits from this, as she is still a Beauharnais, even though she's got nothing to do with him. By 1790, the effects of the revolution had reached the French colonies, including Martinique, and Rose makes the decision for her and Hortense to return to Paris. Rose met up with her husband in November, presumably to discuss survival strategy.
I got a bad feeling about this.
In January 1794, Alexandre was arrested. France had entered its reign of terror, a period of anxiety where anyone could be guillotined for the slightest suspicion. Alexandre had been on the side of the revolutionaries and helped their cause, and when he wasn't helping the revolution, he was on his country estate doing nothing. He was arrested, but to be honest, the reasons for his arrest were flimsy and petty. But as he was part of the aristocracy, the revolutionaries wanted to use him to make an example of him. Rose tried to help her husband, but ended up putting herself under suspicion as she was friends with royalists. So she too is arrested and sent to the same prison as Alexandre.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
The revolutionaries were out of control. Once the monarchy had fallen, nobody, not even the bloodthirsty Robespierre, dreamed of committing regicide. That was ultimately as a result of King Louis XVI not conforming to a constitutional monarchy.
I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
It jumped up a notch.
It did, didn't it?
On the 23rd of July 1794, Alexandre's name was called. He was taken from the prison by cart to the guillotine, and he became one of its many victims. 5 days later, on the 28th of July 1794, Rose, who was still in prison, had her name called. She fainted, but she was to be spared the guillotine. Rather, her name was called as she was to be freed. The reign of terror had ended, Robespierre had been overthrown, and Rose was freed by her friend, Madame Thérèse Tallien, the wife of Jean Lambert Tallien. Jean Lambert was an influential man in the government at the time, and had the power to release people. The era that followed the rule of Robespierre was full of dancing and drinking. There were balls, and the more money you had, the more lavish the party you had. Teresa and Jean Lambert threw the most lavish of parties, and as their friend, Rose was always there. Rose loved the fashion and the glamour of high society. She was also a big fan of the men, taking many military officers and politicians as either friends, lovers, or why not both? One of whom was Paul de Barras, one of the most powerful men at the time in France. He helped her to get her husband's fortune back. It has been speculated that they were lovers, but he was most likely gay. Nevertheless, their relationship was beneficial to both parties. Due to her relationships, the press started slandering her as a way of attacking the new regime. But it didn't bother Rose, as she was living the lifestyle she wanted, and she knew it came at a price. Rose owned a salon in Paris, and as her reputation was soaring, her salon was as infamous as she was. Many of France's high flyers would frequent her salon, and she would use it to network. Rose was determined to maintain her new social status, and would not return to the obscurity of the lower nobility. In October 1795, Rose's pal Paul de Barras instructed 26-year-old Napoleon Bonaparte to put down an uprising, which he did successfully. After the royalists' uprising, all weapons were confiscated in Paris. This included Viscount Alexandre's sabre. Alexandre and Rose's son Eugene asked Napoleon if he could have his father's sabre. Napoleon, who had been promoted to the head of the state army, gave the sabre to Eugene. His mother, Rose, goes to Napoleon and thanked him for his generosity. This is the first time that they had met, and Napoleon was enchanted by Rose. For him, it was love at first sight. Napoleon gave Rose the nickname Josephine, a nickname that stuck, and Rose Beauharnais became Josephine de Beauharnais. For me personally, I feel like Napoleon was a very controlling, possessive person. Just from reading some of his letters and the actions he takes, and again, this is just my opinion, I think Napoleon gave Rose the name Josephine as a power play, a subtle way to assert his control. But that's just me. Anyway, Rose, who I will now call Josephine, married Napoleon on the 9th of March 1796, after only 5 months of knowing each other in a civil ceremony. Napoleon married for love, but her social circle helped his career. But why did they get married so quickly? Josephine needed financial support for her 2 children. Her love for him was slow burning, but it was ever growing. She thought she was pregnant, and as we have seen in war history, war will push people to marry quickly, so they have someone to fight for or return to, and Napoleon was due to go to Italy to fight. The Napoleon family were a close-knit family, and they were all financially dependent on Napoleon, hoping to rise socially through association alone, so when he wed Josephine without talking to his family, they were not happy, and they blamed Josephine, taking an instant disliking to her. They did not approve of the marriage. It also became apparent that Josephine was not pregnant. Napoleon left Paris on the 11th of March 1796 to take command of the army of Italy. Josephine meanwhile stayed in Paris. I'm not saying the relationship was one-sided, but Josephine was happy when Napoleon was gone, as she could spend time with her children and go shopping, much to Napoleon and his bank account's irritation. Rumours spread that while Napoleon was away, Josephine was having affairs, most notably with Hippolyta Charles, a young officer who was seen in Josephine's company. Why did these rumours spread? Because she didn't go to Italy with Napoleon after the wedding. Josephine was far too intelligent to risk her marriage to Napoleon with a stupid fling. Napoleon's star was rising, and she knew that. The rumours, and my opinion that's all they were, reached Napoleon in Italy, who was very jealous. So jealous that he had Josephine put under surveillance and followed to see if there was any truth to these rumours. He then orders for her letters to be opened. Presumably nothing was found. Napoleon wrote to Josephine, "If only I could, I would throw you into my prison, in my heart, and lock you in there forever." Josephine receives letters from Napoleon nearly every day. Controlling or obsessive, you decide. And when he didn't receive a letter, he then wrote, "No letter from you. How that worries me. I expect a courier with news every day. The happiness of my life depends on you, dearest Josephine." I'm seeing red flags here, major red flags. If I was Josephine, I would have got out of this relationship quick.
Gotta go.
But she likes the wealth and the status being married to him brings. Eventually, Josephine is able to convince Napoleon of her innocence. At the end of 1797, Napoleon's campaign in Italy ends, and he returns to France a rich man. On the 21st of April 1799, Josephine purchased Chateau de Malmaison for a whopping 325,000 francs. It was an expensive purchase. Napoleon is away when she is negotiating the price for this place, and knowing what her spending is like, he actually gave her a budget, but unsurprisingly, she ignored it. Napoleon, and to be fair, I can't blame him, would often get angry at Josephine's spending. She would run up high debts, and he would threaten to chase away the delivery men. Napoleon, like King Henry VIII, has a bit of a war boner. He loves war. But war is expensive, and Napoleon was constantly in need of new weapons. Back in France, Josephine would entertain investors, agree a high price, and then take a cut of the profits. Napoleon was not impressed, and rumours start again about Josephine having lovers. Napoleon wrote to his brother Joseph, "All feelings are withered, the glory feels bland. I just want to be alone." I think what's even sadder is that Napoleon starts to believe these rumours, which is understandable. He's controlling, obsessive and far away from home, so the anxiety and paranoia is sure to kick in. But as with the previous rumours, they were fueled by an agenda and full of malice. They may have even been started by Napoleon's own family. The rumours benefited them, as they had disliked Josephine from the start, and anything to shake Napoleon's mental state would benefit his enemies too. The campaign in Egypt was an utter failure. So Napoleon makes a surprise return to France in mid-1799, and he acts as if nothing was wrong. The people in France didn't know. They had only heard how wonderful things had been going in Egypt, thanks to Napoleon's propaganda. When he returned, Josephine knew about the rumours. She went to go visit her husband at their house, later known as Rue de la Victoire, and Napoleon had locked himself inside. Josephine stood outside the front door for the whole day and half a night, with Hortense and Eugene wailing until Napoleon opened his heart and the door. Josephine and Napoleon lay together the next day, peacefully in bed. Napoleon had wanted to send Josephine packing, and yet they were united in bed together. Napoleon's brother Joseph saw them together and thought, "Now I can see everything." On the 9th of November 1799, Napoleon with Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès and his brother Lucien overthrew the Directory by a coup d'etat. A provisional consul was put in place, and on the 12th of December 1799, Napoleon became the first consul of France. Josephine is practically First Lady, but the lack of offspring is an issue. Napoleon's family was hell-bent on getting rid of Josephine, and they called for Napoleon to divorce her, as she was too old to have children. This sent Napoleon into a rage. Josephine had tried all sorts of remedies, but no baby. Clever Josephine thought of a compromise. Her daughter Hortense should marry Napoleon's younger brother, Louis. That way, their child would have both Beauharnais and Bonaparte blood, and if they have a son, Napoleon could adopt their son as an heir. Hortense and Louis Bonaparte were wed in 1802. On Christmas Eve 1800, Josephine was almost killed in an attempt on Napoleon's life when a bomb exploded near her carriage as she was en route to attend the opera. So far, Napoleon had been a stable ruler for France, and so on the 18th of May 1804, Napoleon was nominated/made the Emperor of France. It was thought having an emperor was better than having a council, and the decision of making Napoleon emperor was ratified by another plebiscite, which led to the infamous coronation. Josephine and Napoleon had been married in a registry office, but Josephine knew that her enemies were gathering to get rid of her, and as they got married in a registry office, the Catholic Church wouldn't view it as legit. So, if Napoleon wanted to divorce her, it would be easy. She needed security.
Don't worry, Mr. B. I have a cunning plan to solve the problem.
Josephine went to see Pope Pius VII for confession. She told him that she lived as Napoleon's concubine in the eyes of the Church, as the Church didn't recognise their civil marriage. The Pope then informs Napoleon that he refused to crown him emperor if he and Josephine don't attend a church wedding. This was all part of Josephine's plan to make an impending divorce from Napoleon, due to lack of issue, all the more difficult. The couple wed again in a church ceremony on the 1st of December 1804, which rendered their marriage official. They were then coronated the next day at Notre Dame Cathedral. Reims was the traditional city for coronation, not Paris, which is where they were coronated, because Josephine just loved Paris. At this ceremony, Napoleon takes the crown from the Pope, which he had designed to look like a Roman emperor's crown, and he crowned himself, as he felt no one else was worthy. Napoleon then crowned Josephine as Empress, and he ordered his sisters to carry Josephine's train as she entered Notre Dame. I bet they loved that, considering Napoleon's sisters hated Josephine even more than his brothers did, with a sprinkling of humiliation thrown in. It was reported that Josephine beamed the day that she was crowned empress. However, Josephine almost wasn't crowned, as prior to the coronation, Napoleon had once again toyed with the idea of divorce, eagerly pushed by his siblings. Napoleon's doubts only lasted for a moment, though. There is nothing that compares to my love for little Josephine. In 1805, Napoleon is out on campaign again. The Battle of Trafalgar in the October and the Battle of Austerlitz in December. While Napoleon was away, Josephine ruled. She stayed out of politics, that wasn't really her thing. She enjoyed the glitz and the glam that came with being empress, and her power really only came from Napoleon's love for her. During the Battle of Austerlitz, he wrote to Josephine saying, "The Battle of Austerlitz was the most beautiful of all battles. I wish I could keep you in my heart forever." He wrote to Josephine again in 1807 from Tilsit. He informed her that peace had been established with Prussia and Russia. However, at this point, they had been separated for long periods of time, for quite a few years, and it was putting a strain on their marriage. Napoleon had started taking mistresses, and he and Josephine had separate chambers when they were together. On the 5th of May 1807, Josephine's grandson, Napoleon Louis Charles Bonaparte, died at the age of 4, and I can imagine that Josephine was devastated. The mortality rate had far improved since the medieval times, but there was still always the risk. Even so, no mother or grandmother expects to see them outlive their descendants. I also imagine that Josephine would have provided comfort to her daughter Hortense at this horrible time.
Really?
No, not really. I can't back that up.
1809 was the year of Josephine's downfall. One of Napoleon's mistresses, Polish Countess Maria Walewska, gave birth to his illegitimate child. Much like with King Henry VIII and the birth of his illegitimate child, Henry Fitzroy, the birth of this child proved, at least in Napoleon's mind, that he was not infertile. Napoleon was also aware that politically, he needed an heir, and although he had one sorted, the children of Hortense and Louis, a direct heir would be preferable. Ironic, seeing as it would be the adopted heir that would succeed him. On the 30th of November 1809, Napoleon publicly announced that he still loved Josephine, but in the interest of France, he has decided to divorce Josephine, who wept and was on her knees begging Napoleon to reconsider. He did not, and Josephine signed the divorce papers in the December. Josephine had been supporting Napoleon for 13 years, but now she's lost. She doesn't know what her purpose is and becomes depressed. Napoleon also feels sorrow at the loss of his closest confidant. Josephine retires to Chateau Malmaison, and Napoleon remarried on the 11th of March 1810 to Marie-Louise, the great niece of Marie Antoinette. Go check out my video on the two women if you want to know what Napoleon's two wives actually thought of each other. Despite no longer being married, Josephine and Napoleon kept in touch, and in his letters he called her "my dearest," and even wrote, "Never doubt the sincerity of my feelings for you," writes Napoleon. "They will last as long as I live." Napoleon would also visit Josephine without Marie-Louise, who did not approve. Josephine and Napoleon's relationship is good. They don't fight, but she is no longer in the inner circle. She watches from the outside looking in. Marie-Louise and Napoleon lived in Paris, and the mention of Josephine's name would cause the Empress distress. As a result, Paris, the city that Josephine loved, was now the one place that she couldn't go. After the divorce, Josephine kept the title of Empress at the insistence of Napoleon. "She had been crowned with my hand. I want her to keep the rank and title of Empress. But I definitely do not want her to doubt my feelings, and want her always to consider me as her best and dearest friend." It seemed that despite giving Josephine a massive slap in the face, he wanted to keep on relatively good terms. Although Marie-Louise has also been referred to as Empress at the same time. I know myself I have done it, especially in the Marie-Louise video, and she also gets to keep the title of Empress after her and Napoleon separate, although I guess Josephine's dead at that point. So does Napoleon at one point have two empresses at once? Answers on a postcard. In 1812, Napoleon led a campaign into Russia, which was catastrophic. Napoleon had another defeat at the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, and on the 6th of April 1814, things were so bad that Napoleon abdicates as Emperor of France and goes into exile in Elba. The Bourbon family is reinstated with King Louis XVIII. Napoleon was superstitious. His success started to fade in 1809-1810, the time when he divorced Josephine, and he believes that Josephine was his lucky star. I can feel regret creeping in here. Napoleon writes loving letters to Josephine until the very end, inquiring about her health, admonishing her not to despair and to believe in the future. In 1814, the Tsar Alexander I of Russia and the Prussian King Frederick William III paid their respects to the former Empress at Chateau Malmaison. Josephine's beauty was legendary and reached as far as Russia and Berlin. They wanted to see the majestic woman in the flesh. Josephine and Alexander developed a close friendship. They bonded over art and Alexander's respect for her, Eugene and Hortense. Alexander was very impressed with Josephine's knowledge and love of art when he first visited her in 1814. He wrote home that he has met the rose of Europe. He also added that she outranks many of the men that I've known in my life. Josephine was equally enamoured with the Tsar, and before he left, she presented him with the gift of the Gonzaga cameo, one of the world's most prized engraved gems. Paul Mustard, deputy director of the Hermitage Amsterdam, believes that this suggests the two were lovers. He says, quote, "It is of course a lover's gift, because it's an image of a couple, but it is also a very smart move on her part, a brilliant move of a lady who needs protection, because it's an image of Alexander the Great, with the wife of the man he has conquered. The symbolism is strong. She's saying, 'You can do this to me.'" The parallels being drawn here are clearly with Napoleon, Josephine, and Alexander. Paul then goes on to suggest that Josephine and Alexander briefly courted, which, while I can see where he's coming from with the gifts and its imagery, I am slightly hesitant, as none of the other sources I have read have even the slightest mention of an affair. So I can neither confirm nor deny this, and to be honest, if they did, I would imagine this would be big gossip. The former Empress entangled with the Emperor of Russia? How scandalous! However, I also think it is entirely possible, and in my personal headcanon they probably did court each other. What do you think? Were Alexander and Josephine lovers? Let me know in the comment section down below. Their potential courtship would come to an end as they went on a walk on a chilly day in early May. Josephine was apparently wearing one of her famous sheer gowns, and she caught a cold. The cold then developed into pneumonia, and Josephine Bonaparte died on the 29th of May, 1814, at the age of 50. I mean, why she didn't have a coat on or something of that regard, I do not know.
And they were just running around in a shorts and a t-shirt, and I kept saying, put a coat on, you'll catch your death. And they did.
When Napoleon learned of her death while in exile on the island of Elba, he locked himself in his room for 2 days and refused to see anyone. 4 days later, on the 2nd of June 1814, was Josephine's funeral, which took place at the church of Saint-Pierre et Saint-Paul in Rio. Today, it is still possible to see the recumbent statue of her that stands aloft her tomb. Despite not having any children with Napoleon, Josephine's legacy still lives today, and many modern royals can trace their roots back to her, including Queen Marguerite II of Denmark. Josephine's grandson became Napoleon III, Emperor of France. Her granddaughter and namesake Josephine became Queen of Sweden, and another granddaughter was the Empress of Brazil. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, subscribe and share this video with a friend. Also be sure to check out my other Napoleon content, or if you fancy something a bit different, how about some Tudor history? But until the next one, have a wonderful day!